You're listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.
Welcome to the Mammal Watching podcast with me, Charles Foley, in Minneapolis.
And me, John Hall, in Manchester, England.
John, good to see you. I know you've been at the bird fair in Rutland recently. How was that?
Yeah, thanks, Charles. I missed you there because you were there last time with me 2 years ago. It was good. It's a really nice event. What it's like. It's pretty busy. It was very, very warm, of course, in the UK. So it was maybe a bit quieter on the first day than expected because it was so hot. But yeah, lots of friends, lots of people I've traveled with, lots of companies I have dealt with and guides I know. So really great to catch up with them. A lot of interest in mammal watching. So many of the stalls there offering mammal tours as well as bird tours. Some have more pictures of mammals than birds. I was doing a subconscious count as I went around. It was good to see. And I gave a bit of a talk about mammal watching because it's 21 years old today, or sorry, this year rather. And yeah, quite well attended. Bunch of young people there who came up at the end and had recently found out about the site and had been seeing good stuff like red wolves and others. So I was encouraging them all to write reports. So yeah, really positive. There's so much interest, but still so many people who haven't heard about it. I'm talking to birders who I don't know who they were, but they're obviously very accomplished and experienced birders, giving the conversations they were having with people on the stall. And we got talking about mammals, and they said, "Oh, you can't see any mammals, can you? How many have you seen?" And I said, "Well, 2,452," and their faces just dropped. So there's still a large segment of people out there who've got no idea about this. So we need to keep on converting. And I just want to mention a story I was wanting to tell, I think last month, but forgot. And I mentioned it in my talk and I got a laugh. And that's the story about West Papua, a Klarlik village, because that's a big part of the 21-year talk. Because that story, we love that story, the conservation side, the scientific side, the things that have happened for that village. And it's directly because of mammal watching. But the Carlos Bocos, with his Mammalia tour company, was there last month. And they spent 5 days before they saw the echidna. So it's not always super easy. A lot of people get it the first night, but not always. They were there looking for 5 days. And at the end of the fifth night, they got the echidna. So they were celebrating back in the village. And the head man there, the guide there, who's really running the show, sat with them and said, "Look, now we've seen the echidna, I've got something to show you." And they said, "Oh, what?" And he got up and he went round to a back room and unlocked a door. And he came out with a piece of wood. And they stared at it. "Well, what's that?" And he goes, "This is the walking stick John Hall used in 2023. So like a holy relic, it came out of the back room. So mammal watching, it's a way to do so much and also be given semi-religious status in some villages in West Papua, it seems.
It's a cult, John. It is a cult with you as the very dodgy leader. Heaven help us all.
Open your hearts and your pocketbooks and buy us a coffee. Yeah. All right, Charles and I are very pleased to be joined today by Mark Boson, who many of you will know from the website and social media is in the middle of a big cat year. He's actually taking a break from the year. Right now, he's in Sri Lanka. He's joined his family and he's going to spend, I think he said 12 days not looking for cats, which will be quite unusual for this year, Mark. You must be enjoying the thought of this. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to catch up on how you're getting on.
Thanks very much. And thanks for having me. And like many said before, thanks to you both for all the inspiring work, not only in the podcast, but also the website. It's a great help for people like me out there and trying to observe all those incredible mammals in the world.
Well, welcome, Mark. And perhaps you could just tell the listeners, for the few who don't actually know what you're doing on this big cat year, can you just explain a little bit about your plans?
Yeah, no worries. So for all clarity, I'm not a biologist, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a nature lover like many out there. And I'm 59 and I'm decided to do this big year, which is basically something which originates, I think, from the birding world, where it's a well-common phenomenon. But I actually took that challenge into the mammal world. And my challenge this year is to see as many wildcat species as possible, but also trying to combine that with doing something positive for nature. So in every country which I will visit, I try to support one project or one organization financially, but also trying to put all those people who work hard there for conservation, to put them in the limelight. So it's not only about me ticking off wild cat species, but it's also trying to do something positive for nature.
Yeah, and you started this, in January, was it?
In January, yeah.
Right.
Wild cats, you may also ask, why wild cats? Why not another family? But for me, wild cats are the most iconic mammal species out there. Many times it's the apex predator in an area, which is quite fascinating, I think. They're secretive, difficult to observe, nocturnal many times. And what I find very interesting in wildcats is that they are mostly found in very remote areas. They are flagship species in many cases for countries to protect certain habitats. So for me, those, like most of people on the website, I think those most remote places are the most exciting in the world. So wildcats are, I think, appealing not only to people like us, but to many people out there, normal people. Let's call them normal people in the world. And that's why I think that's a great family to try to observe them.
Sure.
Yeah.
And like you said, I know you've been supporting, directly giving money to conservation projects as you've been traveling, but I also know you've been getting a lot of interest on social media with the stuff you're seeing, and that's been really good for the local guides you're using and the species, and more people will be traveling to see them. In particular, your trip to Borneo almost broke the internet, Mark. The number of people who started writing to me. Can you tell us a bit about that for those few people who may not have heard of what you saw?
No, that's obviously a very interesting trip. And I think also the way, once to Borneo, because I traveled with Chavez, the way they approached the project was really good. But to come back to that observation, let me go a little bit backwards towards the beginning of the year. When you start a big year like this, you look at all the wild cat species and you're making in your mind and in your spreadsheets probability analysis per cat. And there was one wildcat species, which I just made a big cross. It was the only wildcat species which I crossed out. It's impossible to see, and it's the Borneo bay cat. So I was 30 days in Borneo, and it started with 5 days in Brunei. And on the 2nd of June, I had a presentation like you've done as well, John, in Borneo. And I had a presentation for the Brunei Nature Society. And I was at the Royal Yacht Club Brunei. And I had a talk there with Andrew Hearn, a British scientist who has worked for over 20 years in Borneo and who has done all the groundbreaking work in the research of Sunda clouded leopards, which I had a great talk with him. And he also told me that more than 20 years ago, when he was just there in Borneo, in his first year, I believe, he saw a Borneo bay cat. And it was the only time he's seen it over all his career. And next to him was Ulmer Graf, who was a German professor. And he explained to me that he worked already also for more than 20 years in Borneo. And only the last 2 weeks, he had one Borneo bay cat on a camera trap for the first time in those 20 years. So I was just, I was amazed by those stories. When those people talk about it, I really I'm thrilled. So on the 9th of June, we were in Beluran, which is a secondary forest, a selective logging area, adjacent to Daramakot, well famous for the Sunda clouded leopards. And we're on an afternoon game drive. It's seen a few orangutans, and it's quite a nice area. It's a little bit more open than the Daramakot. And I think around 5:30, we came across the road and we crossed a bend. And as soon as we crossed the bend, there was this wildcat species. It was a cat. And it just came from the right to the left. And it crossed, I think, 20, 25 meters in front of the road or car. And, when you see something, it's off. It's off from what you know. We've seen many leopard cats before. We had a real good group of experienced mammal watchers. And you feel it's off. It came onto the road, and you thought, when is it going to show its pattern? When is it going to show its color? but it was just darkish, no pattern at all. And the gist was just off, it was just off. And it just crossed swiftly over the road, stopped at the end of on the side of the road in the ditch. It turned its head, and it was gone, and we all could see it moving over the road. I think the moment it disappeared into the ditch, there was only one guy on the truck who managed to get his binoculars on his face. But you knew it was off, and we were just shocked. And I remember just when I saw it moving, I said, "Bakehead, bakehead." And it was just the half hour afterwards, we stood outside the vehicle, discussing with each other, what did you see? What did you see? What did you not see? What did you not see? You know how it's going when you see something like that, something remarkable. And so the great thing also was we only found out, our driver, which was Fazi, who's done this for 10 years, and he drives, all those trips, he does it for 10 years. But he didn't say anything, he was very wise, he didn't say anything. And when we came back at Belleran, at the place where we stayed, the staff office, and we had dinner, and we discussed. Only then did we find out that Fazi had already seen in his 10 years 4 times a baycat crossing. And he said this was definitely a baycat, So it was, you've seen the different clips and videos we took during the discussions afterwards. And you both know more than I, probably, whenever you see such a rare observation, it was just a privilege, and something it never even crossed my mind, even when I was in Borneo, that it would be possible like that. So it was just a great gift, it was a great gift, and still thrilled about it when I think back about the moment. And that was very special, very special.
Amazing. Yeah, what a story. I think I saw one in similar circumstances, and a very, very similar story. Wasn't even on my list of potential targets. We all saw it, and none of us could believe it. And I spent the first 5 minutes trying to turn it into something else because I just didn't want to say we'd seen a baycat. But like you say, there was nothing else it could have been. But didn't get a photo. But yeah, what a thing to see! Congratulations, that's really fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, those golden cats, baycats, the African, the Asian ones, they're probably the hardest of all of the cats to find. They just seem to be so cryptic, just don't want to be seen.
No, I think you're totally right, Charles. And I think for me, those 5, like the mainland clouded leopard, Asian and African golden cat, and the mountain cat, I think those are extremely, extremely difficult. But then the Borneo baycat for me was even one step higher, But I think all those cats, I think, are the most difficult ones, and we'll see how far I get. With those.
All right. So what's the magic number that you're on at the moment?
For the year, it's 14, and for life, it's 20. So it's really hard work, and you miss things. I missed the obvious ones. Incredible, but I missed the cheetah in South Africa. And that was because Kruger was flooded at the time. I missed the black-footed cat there. But very happy I got the serval and caracal there. Sometimes and I try to stay calm and to enjoy all the moments out there. Even if it's a struggle to see it, or sometimes when I miss it, I don't want to be too, how do you say that, too stressed about only seeing that specific target. If it's only about that one, and I don't enjoy all the other stuff, that doesn't work. So I really try to enjoy it all out there. Everything was out there. And for me, in all fairness, in comparison to you both, life is easy. Life is easy for me because I like everything what's out there. I like mammals, I like birds, I like reptiles, amphibians. Yes, I see you still laughing, but
What are you trying to say over here, Mark?
Life is just easy for me in comparison to the real ones. So.
I have heard from several guides, Mark, around the world about what a great client you are. so positive and you don't get stressed and everything's always good. So I hope you'll consider becoming a life coach to mammal watchers when the big year finishes. There's a lot I can learn from you, I'm sure, and I'll be available for therapy sessions once a week starting January.
Yeah. So 6 months in, you're in Sri Lanka now. Where do you go from here?
From here, I go to China, where you both had an inspiring podcast last time. So for me, that's important, but because I've got 4 potential cat species there. From there, I move on to Bolivia, which I think is great. I've been there last year, so that's with Nick again. And from there, which is quite, I think, nice to hear. You know, I read John's report about Panama, about the Unchilla. So I'm now trying, after Bolivia, I probably go to Panama for 10 days. And try to get that one there. And then the remainder of the year, there's a few things already filled in, like I'm going to Harriet for the African golden cat. I'm going back to the Western Sahara for the sand cat. I missed it in February. I'm very pleased that I will go with Sebastian to the bay cat. So he really... he catched out to me, or how do you say that? He reached out to me, and I'm really thankful for that. So we'll go for the bobcat in the States. And Chile will be in there. I'm going to Brazil also in October. But there's still some countries which I will need to fill in. So I try to plan 2 or 3 months ahead. It's fixed. But I try to keep flexible. There has to be some spots which are flexible. If I miss things, new cats which I've never seen before, I'm trying to catch them up. If it's something like a cheetah, which I've seen loads before, I'm not gonna catch that one up just to tick it off in this year. I won't do that. So that's my strategy, and we'll see how far I get. If I get close to 30 for the year, I will be fine. And then for life, probably a little bit over 30. Then I would do great. But again, I don't determine the success only in the amount of wild cat species. It's also about what I am able to do for, guides out there, for conservation. So it's a mixture of things where I measure myself if I can call the success or not.
And I know that a big part of this is fundraising for some of the local conservation projects. Can you tell us roughly how much you've been able to raise so far?
Yeah, up to now it's about 25,000. So I hope to get to 50. And in each country it's small amounts between 1,000 and 3,000 US. But it's also about trying to interview those people, put them in the limelight. So it's not only about money, it's also about giving attention to all those people working out there in sometimes very difficult circumstances, but who are extremely passionate. I've met quite a few of them, and I'm really impressed, how they approach it. And I think especially those who are able to combine, and we all know there's a few examples out there who combine ecotourism with conservation, really do it like that. Like One Stop Borneo, I think that's excellent. If you're able to do that, then that's a concept I really, which is really inspirational to me.
Well, fantastic, Mark. I'm great it's going so well. I'm great you're doing so much for conservation. I know all the guides you're working with are really happy. And let's have you on at the end of the year, and we can hear in more detail about the whole year, and hopefully of the 30-something cat species you'll have seen by the end of the year. It's amazing.
Thanks very much, John. I'll also take this opportunity to encourage people who listen to this podcast just to buy a coffee, for the Mammalwatching website. I think you're doing great stuff. If you looked at the past and how it has evolved, and there's a lot of money involved to keep it running. So I would really encourage everybody to buy a coffee and try to do it on a monthly basis. For all of us, it's such a lot of info, valuable info out there. A little bit of contribution, I think that's more than deserved for mammalwatching.com. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that plug. No, and I know you are a very generous contributor, so thank you again for that, Mark.
Okay. All right.
Take
Bye-bye.
care, Mark. Thanks.
So Charles and I are really happy to be joined today by Brett Hartl, who's a Government Affairs Director at the Centre for Biological Diversity. Brett coordinates the centre's work on federal legislative issues that affect endangered species, public lands, oceans, climate and energy. He has a degree from Prescott College. He's actually calling from Prescott right now. His degree's in conservation biology, but he also has a law degree from Lewis and Clark Law School. You'll know Brett from some of his reports on mammal watching. I think his first, he said, was probably 2018 when he was in Uganda, but he's often on the site, one of the old school mammal watchers. But before law school, Brent spent 5 years as a field biologist working with endangered species in Hawaii and Southern California. He also worked before joining the centre in the House Natural Resources Committee for the Democratic staff and was a senior policy fellow at the Society for Conservation Biology. Very impressive. Brett, it's really nice to meet you. Welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, wonderful to meet you, Brett. Well, I know John has just given you that rather fine introduction, but let me ask you to have you tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. And I don't put everything on my official bio just because it would run long. But when I was young, one of my first jobs was actually a park ranger in Glacier National Park in Montana, which I think actually was the first thing that got me interested in mammals and mammal watching, because it is one of the few parks in the lower 48 that still has the full contingent of mammals that were sort of pre-European inside it, which is kind of neat. So I was a park ranger for a few years. As John notes, I did my undergrad in conservation biology, and I spent another like 4 to 5 years after undergrad sort of doing field work in different places, mostly Hawaii and California. I worked in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands in the big marine park and wildlife refuge that extends way out towards Midway, working on the monk seal project, studying seabirds, sea turtles, things like that. Spend more time on the main Hawaiian Islands, mostly on Kauai, also doing endangered species work. So this was like the early 2000s. A lot of work with the endangered seabirds, but also again with the monk seal population, which at the time on the main islands was really small. There was only maybe 4 or 5 females that were giving birth back then, so each one was quite precious. Did some work in California as well, different types of field science. I worked on the Farallon Islands for a few years, which was really great. Got to see every season, so the seabird breeding season, but also the elephant seal pupping season and the great white shark season when they come and feed on the elephant seal pups. And then eventually I detoured back into law school, which I guess at the time made sense. And I knew I wanted to do conservation work, so I studied environmental law and have had a lot of experience, both, I would say, in DC and out, doing policy work, political work, legal work, all focused on trying to do a better job of conserving wildlife. My organization mostly focuses on U.S. species and their conservation, but we do use legal tools, which actually would love to chat more about, to leverage U.S. law to also do international conservation. So we have a targeted international program which focuses on how we can sort of use our pressures to make better change elsewhere. And then in my spare time, I do a lot of wildlife watching, mammal watching, recovering obsessive birder, trying to get away from that a little bit back towards mammals, and just get out whenever I can.
Fantastic. It's an extraordinary career. You don't look old enough to have done all these things, I have to say. So it's super diverse and varied, and really interesting to talk to someone who's involved on the policy and the legal side. So we'll definitely be talking more about that.
Yeah.
So you've obviously always been interested in mammals and birds, but we won't talk about that. At what point did you realize you were a mammal watcher?
I think I would say in like 2018, and honestly, it was a little bit after doing a few birding trips where I kind of regretted not looking at the mammals. I was with groups of birders, and I had the Borneo mammal book, and we saw almost nothing because we didn't go out really much after dark. And there were a few trips where, I enjoy bird watching, but I realized that the things that really sparked it for me were mammals. I wrote up actually my list of like most sort of personally meaningful like wildlife moments, and I realized almost all of them were mammals. There are some birds in there, but the top ones were all mammals. And yeah, I kind of drifted away and came back to it. When I did work in Montana, I just had amazing sightings. Like I saw a Wolverine really close at like 10 feet.
Oh, wow.
I saw at least weasel at like 3 feet. Just
Wow.
walked past my tent, and I had a lot of great experiences. And then I kind of, I don't know, sort of forgot. And then I came back to it in like 2017, 18, when I started to realize like you could actually sort of just be a mammal watcher and not have to just do it as a tag along for birding.
And how did you become an environmental lawyer? What was the driving force behind that?
Yeah, it was mostly when I worked in Hawaii. I would say Hawaii is, the extinction capital of the world, mostly due to invasive species just wiping out the native flora and fauna. If you live there and you're not on holiday and you realize that like everything below 3,000 feet is a non-native introduction, right? It's just a menagerie of random things from all over the world, and the native species are in a really bad place. Um, it was sort of a realization, at the time with the monk seal program, a lot of people that worked on it were saying like, this is just the most well-studied extinction in history, right? It just seemed very bleak, because everyone understood what the problems were, but being a scientist didn't actually necessarily give you the tools to solve it. So I wanted to go back to some type of grad program and settled on law, because I wanted to understand the mechanisms and the ways that you could actually sort of bring about the right changes to actually get species back on track. Because I was getting honestly frustrated studying things and not feeling like I could do anything about it other than document their declines.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you sort of took that approach. So obviously you've been out in the field first, got frustrated with the limitations that, let's face it, pretty much all field conservationists run into.
Yeah.
And then went into the environmental law field. And I find this interesting because I get approached quite often by people coming to me after a lecture, for instance, and saying, what can I do to help? And they don't have a biological background, let's say, but they're obviously keen, they're really interested in conservation. And obviously, conservation is not just about people in the field. It is about advocacy. It is about legalities. It is about communication, etc. And so I find it really interesting that you decided to take that approach, having already been in the field, and deciding, okay, this is how I can make a big impact.
Yeah. Now I've been doing environmental law for like 15 years, so it feels normal. But at the time, I don't know if I felt like I made the right choice, because I love doing field work. I mean, field work is fantastic. But yeah, if you work in a place like Hawaii, I'm sure there's similarly frustrating places all over the world where the problem is very obvious, but I had not learned in my undergrad degree just how to solve it, right? Like all I understood was like the mechanisms of extinction and biology and doing good methods and field work. And I certainly thought about a couple different approaches. I knew of a few nonprofit environmental organizations, so I kind of knew that was a thing, but it was a little bit of a leap. I didn't really know, but I think there are other ways to contribute. But and we can talk about them too. But I think at the time it just made sense. And I don't know how much you've spent time in Hawaii at all. Like there's not a lot of mammals other than Hawaiian hoary bat, which I have seen, and the monk seal. But if you work also up in the Alakai Swamp on Kauai, which is the wettest spot on the planet, in some of the hardest terrain like I've ever encountered, and still to this day, I was also just getting, my body was just getting beat up. So I was like, I should do something like that's more sustainable in the long run, because like it's hard to do that job year after year because it's just very, very physically demanding.
Just you mentioned the monk seal and the problems it was facing back then. What were the problems?
Well, back then the main problem was dietary. Was simply the fishing fleets that were operating, especially in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, were actually competing directly for the ground fish that they depended on. And again, the science was pretty well known, and it really wasn't until the monument was created in 2007 and the management plan and also lawsuits forced the fisheries basically out of that area. Because if you look at them like a typical pup on the main Hawaiian Islands, they're usually fatter and healthier than the Northwest Hawaiian Islands because there's more food. There's just a bigger reef system. There's better deep water options. The Northwest Hawaiian Islands are like little dots. And so the food availability was low and the competition with the fishermen was very high. And it was only like 8 boats, but that was enough to do it. Obviously, we're still fighting about it now in court.
8 boats. That
Yeah.
8 boats were literally what was driving this population to extinction.
Yeah, it wasn't a large fishing fleet, but they were targeting the same deep water species, right? Monk seals dive really deep to find fish, and that was where they were fishing. And it was pretty well known because all you had to do was look at the population. They were always skinny. You'd see very malnutrition, individuals, pups dying. So it was not like a unknown thing. But again, it wasn't like some other threat. It was just that was the main problem driving their decline. And now, thankfully, at the moment, the population has come back. I think it's at like 15 or 1600. But when I was there, it was like 800, but a declining demographic.
So what steps did you take? I mean, were you directly involved in those lawsuits?
No. I mean, others, friends, colleagues, it's always a team effort. So I was probably in law school when things started to turn around. And eventually the fishermen were phased out. The population is doing better. And I, not wanting to be super political, but this administration just is attempting to reopen those fishing areas again. They just announced it 3 weeks ago, I think. So, some are all environmental victories that are transient. You have to defend them. They rarely are fully permanent. But the science is clear. And again, the law is, in our view, clear. But the reality is that the people that will stop it are, organizations like mine and others that will be the ones going to court to basically saying like it's illegal to reopen this. It's going to push the species back towards extinction. But the law is actually quite clear. You can't do that.
All for the sake of 8 votes. It's not some massive economic and social benefit, right? It's tiny.
No.
Yeah. Ugh. Well, let's hope that doesn't happen. So what about the cases you have worked on? What are some of the more interesting things you've done in your career?
Yeah. And I just want to say, obviously, there's lots of people involved, lots of teams, lots of groups. Some of the things that I've worked on that might be relevant or interesting to mammal watchers. I take a lot of pride. In law school, I realized California doesn't protect wolves under its state level Endangered Species Act. So I actually wrote the petition to list them as a officially protected species under California law. I was, did that back in 2010. Happened to be just at the time that the very, very first wolf was coming back into the state. It was OR7. It was like the famous wolf that had this crazy, well-documented journey. Fast forward a few years, the Fish and Wildlife Commission did list them. There's now, I think, 7 or 8 packs in the state. And while protected also by federal law, having protections with the state of California is very important. California brings additional tools to bear, and federal protections actually have been something that, if you follow any U.S. stuff when it comes to wolves, the government is constantly trying to end federal protection for wolves. I've been part of at least 2 or 3 rounds of that fight, keeping wolves on the endangered species list successfully. Always a big team effort, but important to win with the right legal arguments. My organization, a few others, fought off grizzly bear delisting twice in the Greater Yellowstone system, and we're gearing up for the next round soon, which is likely to happen this year or next year. Fights over things like wolverines and other mammals, fishers, martens. I've helped it with in some ways or others. And I do a fair amount of work also with our team that works on chemical pollution. So I actually do a lot of work on sort of landscape level types of threats. So like heavy metal pollution, pesticide pollution, which for small mammals and birds and other species, it's really hard to detect a lot of the harms that caused from pollution because, a dead beach mouse is going to be gone before anyone even discovers it was poisoned. So I do a lot of work personally on those types of issues as well. And we've had some, victories. Like I said, they're always somewhat temporary, and we always have to keep re-winning the same fights over and over again. But we as a community, myself and my organization, we've definitely helped conserve a lot of the mammals in the US that mammal watchers like to see.
Tell us a little bit about the Wolverine case, because I hadn't heard that there was much litigation surrounding the Wolverine populations.
Yeah, so under the Endangered Species Act in the US, there's a mechanism to protect what's called a distinct population segment, which is a relatively unscientific term, but it's nonetheless in the law. And the population of wolverines in the lower 48 is very small, a few hundred individuals. Several groups have tried for, 10, 15 years to get them protected. So there's a process whereby citizen groups can actually petition the government to protect the species. We can go to court to try to force them to make a decision, and we can actually challenge the underlying merit of the decision if they get it wrong. So when wolverines were evaluated for protection, due to, and I will be fair, Democrats don't always do much better than Republicans here. The back in the Obama years, they said no. Even though the main threat in the lower 48 was actually pretty well understood as it's a climate-driven problem. It has to do with deep snowpack and denning snowpack for females in particular. They have a very specific sort of need for a very, very deep snowpack to have their den. And all the scientists actually pretty much said they deserved listing. And then the government basically chickened out due to pressure from mining industry, forest and timber harvesting groups, because they were worried about the sort of potential economic conflicts that might come about. So that's not a new thing, but in the US system, it's fairly common. But we were able to go to court actually and overturn that decision. They basically were forced to take another look. And the judge was like, well, the science, no one really needs to understand the sort of the deep mechanics, but look, the science was clear that they needed deep snow, and in a climate-induced future, there would be less and less. So now they are listed, and we've gotten them protections, but we're still fighting about things like what we call critical habitat, which is a legal level of protection. They still don't have that. We're fighting over that. So it's with a lot of wildlife species, especially those that have perceived conflict, we often see the government falling short. And the nice thing, at least in the US system, is that outside advocates can challenge those decisions in court and hold the government to sort of the right legal standard.
And can you walk us through this a little bit? So let's take the Wolverine example, okay? The science is coming out. It is saying that they need deep snowpack. How many groups would get together to actually bring this case to the government? Is it typically one or two and always the same actors, or does it include many different community groups?
It's oftentimes a similar constellation of organizations. It does vary every time. I'd have to go back and look to remember. I would say there were like 4 to 5 that were involved in that fight, all environmental nonprofits that focus on wildlife or issues relating to climate. Anyone can, though. There have been individual scientists that have brought lawsuits. Some of the most famous ones that went all the way to the Supreme Court were brought by individual scientists. So it's oftentimes my organization and a few others. We're probably the most, I would say. There's a lot of groups are focused on wildlife, but we are focused on, just as our name suggests, the full spectrum. We care just as much about the rare plant, the invert, as the large charismatic mammal. So we do try to actually have a pretty broad view of biodiversity protection. But yeah, a handful of groups. Usually we represent, several million members, and it is oftentimes that same rough group, but we're in most of those fights. I don't think we've sat out any of the big ones over the last 20 years, but anyone can.
Right.
The most important thing, and we could talk about it now, is in order to bring a case in the first instance, the most important thing everyone has to have is something called legal standing. And then, I don't know if you guys know about it, but it's basically in the US system, in order to go to court, you have to demonstrate to the court that you represent people that have a personal connection to the thing that you are fighting about. So it's not as if we can fight about any species any time. We actually have to show that some of our members actually care about the environment. And not only that they care about the species at issue. For a species like Wolverine, the best, what we would call a standing declarant, which is a person that has a personal harm, would be a mammal watcher who actually goes out and looks for mammals. Because if we can just say generically, yeah, we care about wildlife, but the court needs to actually show that we have individual members with skin in the game that actually are willing to basically swear under penalty of perjury that they actually try to see these species. And for wolverines, I mean, I've only seen one once. Like, they're not easy to observe, even for the best of us. So in order to even be part of that coalition, you have to find a member or two that actually cares and has gone to look for. You don't have to succeed, which is a good thing. You don't have to be successful, but you have to try. And ideally try more than once to show that this is not some one-off fluke, so that we can actually show the court that this matters to us deeply. And this is a requirement for all legal cases in the United States system. So if you care about saving species, we need to find someone that actually has tried to go look for them.
So does that person have to be an American citizen, or can anyone have a legal standing?
You don't have to be an American citizen, but you do have to be a member of our org. We don't even need your money. We just need you to sign up and become a member. Right. No, you don't. And some of our cases, we do work on a lot of actually marine mammals overseas, a lot of overseas work for species also affected by illegal trade and wildlife trade and parts and specimens and whatever. We have members that are from other countries that are declarants. And again, all it really is basically saying, like, I'm a member of an organization. It doesn't have to be ours, but I certainly wouldn't mind. And I like looking for this species in this place, and I've been there in the past, and I'm going to go again in the future, to basically show a court that it's real. And oftentimes we struggle to find people around the world that want to actually, basically sign a short piece of paper saying, yeah, I care.
Oh, wow. Well, I could put me down for pretty much any mammal you can think of. If I haven't, it's in my plans to go and see it. But,
that would be fantastic. I think I am often one of our standing declarants. I mean, I can't do every species, but I can do a lot of them. But it's always a challenge because sometimes, like, we were looking, I think it's the painted bats, the really ones that have the really cool patterns on the wings. Yeah. There's a huge trade of those. Like, they're sold as basically tchotchkes for people's collections. Yeah. But if we want to sue our government for failing to enforce, like, CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, or protect them better, the very first step is finding someone who has seen that species.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen it. I could have done that. Fiona Reed also cares passionately about those. She probably painted them. Yeah, we can always find, I think we could, pretty much anything we can find someone. So if you're ever stuck, don't hesitate to come to me or post on the site, please.
But you have to sign up. That's the key thing. It's great. I mean, and also, but I would say, like, there's lots of groups, and, you don't have to join them all, but, like, as people, your listeners, if you have a favorite group, it's important to support them. Again, usually, no, we're not worried about the money. It's really just being able to actually advocate for that species requires us to say, John Hall's our member. We stand for him and his interests. Some of the things that we've been trying to do, for example, under U.S. law, there's the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and there's a provision of it that says that no country can import seafood into the United States unless it meets U.S. standards of marine mammal bycatch. We are currently suing over those basically countries failing to meet that for like 10 different nations, and we're looking for, like, dolphins in the Mediterranean and species in Indonesia and Asia where the practices are really subpar, but in order to go to court to be like, we can't accept their seafood. And the U.S. is the largest importer of seafood in the world. We have a huge market influence to drive other countries to fix their bycatch issues, but we need people to, like, be like, yeah, I've seen this species and this species before.
Yeah.
And does one have to have actually seen a species?
You just have to, I think, legitimately try. There are
try
many
it.
species we miss. That is part of the fun, part of the disappointment. But as long as you have basically an interest in trying to see it, that's enough.
Right.
Supreme Court has even said that there's a few very famous cases, but basically, it's more plausible if you have someone who's, if you've missed it, that you've tried constantly for other things, right? Like we don't all have 100% success.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
It's the ones we missed that I want to protect in particular because I still want to see them. Let's be selfish.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, just don't tell the judge that, John.
No, actually, no, that's actually exactly it. I mean, at some level, many of these things are endangered species. They're hard to see. That's okay. We said that's why I'm desperate to wanting to see it, right?
Yeah.
And oftentimes fail because they're rare.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
Well, it strikes me that if a case comes up and you're looking for people, a message on either mammalwatching.com or if it's country specific on something like the North American Mammal Watching Facebook page would probably secure you a whole bunch of people.
Well, the only wrinkle is you have to do it beforehand. So you have to a person has to commit to the org, because if it looks like I'm out shopping around, that doesn't work, actually. You have to join first and then be part of the org before we sue. So it's like it's a little bit of a chicken and the egg. We need you on board before we can actually, have you as our court person. So we ideally, again, it doesn't take much to sign up for most of these groups, including ours, but it's a weird kind of gotcha thing that courts care about, but we need folks to join. Even if we don't know, we're going to need you for standing later. And because if it looks like you're out there shopping around, that gets a little bit more dicey.
We will include for sure notes for the podcast on how people can sign up, especially if it's free. That's very attractive.
Yeah.
And maybe we can post on Mammal Watching as well, explaining this, and maybe 2 or 3 of the organizations that would be most useful to. But
I'll put out a pitch that if anyone's interested, to email me, because then at least I'll know that you're out there and the species that we can work with.
Yeah. Wow, that's a really useful service, a small service we can provide. That's fantastic. Yeah.
See, it's great. Mammal watchers we can all help in small ways, but actually really important ways to help conservation.
Yeah, that's exciting. Good. Thank you very much for letting us know. This is really important.
So just going back to the law aspects of it, obviously you started off as a biologist, so obviously you've got a deep understanding of biological processes, etc. How important has that been in your law work? I mean, is it essential, or could you have just come straight out of law school and never having seen an animal before and done this work?
I'm definitely not the typical one. I would say it's much less common to have lawyers that also have a science background. That is not a common skill set. I think it's actually highly beneficial. So I'm glad I have both, because to meld the law and the science can oftentimes then tell the right story to the court about why something is illegal. So as just an example, I worked on a case, and this was not particularly mammal heavy, but it did help mammals. It was about heavy metal pollution in the U.S. And how the EPA was not doing a good enough job of basically maintaining the standards for what the sort of acceptable level of pollution is, which is always a weird thing. But in the U.S., it's not the answer is not always 0, which maybe it should be, but what is the right level of pollution? And having a good science understanding of bioaccumulation, of sort of legacy pollutants that can stay in ecosystems for a very long time, and the sort of the wide-ranging nature of some species. So we focused actually a lot on sturgeon in our case, was to sort of say hey, here's the EPA basically saying what they think the acceptable level of a contaminant is based on laboratory studies of a trout that might live 5 years. That is not going to help a sturgeon that might live 100, that feeds in the sediment of a river that is just accumulating year after year this heavy metal contaminant. And I think by having a science background to sort of be able to decipher or interpret and learn how to tell that story correctly and figure out what's the most persuasive thing is helpful. there are lots of times where I read the government's briefs, and it's very clear that the lawyers there don't have a science background. They don't understand the law. So that's to our benefit. So I won't complain about it because we obviously would like to win. But I think it is actually really, really helpful to understand conservation, ecology, natural history, so that when you're looking at reams and reams of government data to try to figure out what they did wrong, you actually understand the right conservation answer that hopefully then the court will agree with you. And a lot of we won a case recently about a particular pesticide that's very, very bad, malathion. It's an organophosphate. And it was the same thing. Like we were able to tell stories, and one of ours was actually Buena Vista Lake shrew, a little tiny shrew in California. Like we were able to tell a story about this little mammal and say like, hey, you know, the way they're doing it, like if you poison this tiny little mammal, you're not even going to ever know you killed it. It's so small, and it lives like so much of its life underground, and in like the government can't pretend that they know what the right level and the safe level is, because they're so, like, how many times have we seen shrews in our lives? And the government didn't understand that. They were just like, no, it's just a mammal. Like, I don't know, it's just a generic mammal in their view. So I think it's very helpful. It's not a requirement. I wish more environmental lawyers had a science background, but yeah.
So looking at today's legal landscape, what would you say are some of the biggest environmental challenges facing the US?
Yeah, I mean, it's not great times right now. You know, I'll just say to be somewhat fair, you know, environmental advocacy is challenging under both a Democratic administration or a Republican administration, but this one is particularly challenging. You know, we are seeing, I think, a different type of sort of broad scale attack on the environment that had not happened before, even in the first Trump administration. I think what's different now is that, you know, for example, the Fish and Wildlife Service, they've lost like 30%, 40% of their staff, some of their greatest institutional knowledge. A lot of their older folks that took these early retirement buyouts because they were feeling pressure to get to go. And so we're in a world right now where there's just not a lot of institutional knowledge left in a lot of the US federal agencies that do conservation work. So even if they are flawed and make mistakes, there's still, you know, there's just very few of them. So even if you're looking at, you know, conserving black-footed ferrets, Mexican wolves, other species, there's very few people left to even, like, you know, make sure the captive populations are okay, and to, you know, do the sort of necessary day-to-day, month-to-month work is super challenging. You know, we continue to fight the worst of the worst things in court, and you know, usually we win because oftentimes the law is on our side, and what the government did is egregious, and it's obviously very, very egregious right now. But you know, it is disheartening that a lot of the just capacity to do the right type of conservation work has just been purposefully dismantled. And that's going to take a long time to fix, unfortunately. And, you know, for a lot of wildlife on the brink, there's not really that cushion of like, oh, we can wait 5 years. Like oftentimes it can't. So, you know, things are not, they're not great right now. But nonetheless, we just continue pushing and trying to hold the line as best we all can.
Can we talk a bit about your mammal watching now? What are some of your best experiences? You mentioned the Wolverine outside from 10 feet. I'd love to hear about that as one, but maybe some others too.
Yeah, the Wolverine, that was one of the top ones. I was doing a long day hike. I had started really early, and it was just basically I was up in the Alpine on trail, and I just was sitting having a snack. So I wasn't
Where were you? What state?
I was in Glacier in Montana in the park, and I was just up high on a trail, like in the Alpine zone, and I was just sitting quietly because it was just me. As a park rangers, you're always out patrolling on your own, and it was just like there happened to be a blind corner, and you know, like all animals, they do like the trails because they're easier to walk through. And I just turned as this Wolverine came around the corner about 10 feet away, and we just sort of stared at each other, and I could see like every detail, like super close. And then he kind of startled and then ran down the hill, and I watched him, disappear. So the whole thing only took like, 1 minute max, but my view was like, I'll never surpass that because it was so, so close. I could see its teeth. So that was amazing. And
Wow.
that park I spent basically 3 seasons, and so I saw the whole complement of everything. So every mustelid basically got in that park, as well as many, many bears and other species. I had a couple. I've done a lot of the standard ones that you all have done, and I've followed your footsteps. I had fantastic snow leopard and Hemis. We watched this one female for like 13 hours from dawn till dusk. She stayed in view all day. Watched her stalk sheep and yak multiple times unsuccessfully, but watched her really, really long time. That was pretty good. It was a really great trip. Did the tigers later down the lowlands. I've been to India a few times. Another top one for me, I do love the whale swimming. That is a fun one. I went to Sri Lanka before that fell apart, and we had an amazing day with what I think was a heat run of blue whales. It's never been really documented, but we were watching these 3 individuals for basically 3 hours. Like they're usually almost impossible to keep up with in the water because they're so fast, but they were doing these slow arcing movements past each other, which they were not feeding, they weren't traveling, they were just, you'd see a male and then, or I couldn't tell their sex, but you see one approach the other and kind of arc itself towards it repeatedly. Don't really know what that was about, but there was 3 of them doing it for hours, and we were able to keep up with them and repeatedly get in the water to watch them. That was probably my top experience, because blue whale in the water is just ludicrous compared to seeing it from a boat. When you see the whole animal and you're 30 feet away and it's right below you, you're like, that's pretty much as good as it gets. So that was pretty cool. I saw that black panther in Krang Krachan National Park in Thailand before it was habituated, before I think anyone knew it was there. So we were out really early in pre-dawn, and it saw a leopard cross the road, and I got my light on it, and I was like, the what is that? It's like a very skinny black bear, and my brain took a few seconds to process what we were looking at, because no one had really, it had not become habituated the way it is now. It was shy, it ran away. That was pretty cool. The same day I saw my first sun bear and a few other lifers, so that was a really good day. Had some good nights with Mike in Borneo, which was great. Missed the clouded leopard, which hurts a little, but did really well on everything else. So yeah, I mean, I feel like I've done a lot of the good classics. I'm still, going to do China next year and a couple other places. So trying to chip away at families and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's an impressive set of experiences. I'm envious of many of those, but the blue whale swimming in particular, that sounds fantastic.
Yeah, that one, I'll just say, I've done humpbacks and sperm whales, and I did minkies in Australia in Cairns, which was cool. But yeah, honestly, none of them have scratched the same itch. The dopamine hit's not as great as the blue whale. I think as they go, that's the best, and I highly recommend doing it. They now run them out of Timor.
Right.
And they seem to have that pretty well dialed in. But yeah, that was still to me the top one experience.
Wow. Lucky man. Lucky man.
And what are your next top targets?
I like a lot of you, I'm trying to do families. I do sort of the taxonomic diversity thing as a guide to try to find cool animals. So I still have aardvark to get, which I'm gonna try for this winter. I've been to Africa many times, but just haven't been in a place where you could go out at night. So I'm gonna go to Merrick and get the black-footed cat hopefully, and spend 3 weeks down there for mammals. Go up and do the Kasanka bat migration and a couple of the other kind of classic things. Walrus next month up in Norway and Svalbard. Try to get that family done. I have failed several times to see mountain beaver. It's high on my list of frustrations. I don't know what I'm doing wrong on that one. Keep trying, but I'll crack it eventually. And yeah, like many of you, cats, canids, all carnivores, the usual kind of things that we all chase. I'm doing that as well, but I feel like I've been lucky in that I have seen a lot of my kind of highest priority species. So I'm happy about that, but there's still many, many more on the list.
There are always many, many more on the list, right?
Yeah, every time you take one off, 3 come on.
That's right, exactly. Or if not, the bloody taxonomists split them in half as well. That's the other thing. Just the thing with the mountain beavers. Apparently, they go wild for apples. So stick some apples somewhere and then watch them come flooding out.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to try that.
I think
Top tip from Charles.
I caught one with Coke Smith at his backyard on the Olympic Peninsula. I think we used apples. Yeah. Have you seen them, Charles? I can't remember.
I have. I've caught them again using apples. Yeah. I went through a whole range of vegetables and fruits until somebody, he was like a Google software engineer, and he came over and said, "What are you doing?" I told him, he said, "No, you just use apples. Everyone knows that. Everyone knows that Apodontias like apples." And sure enough, we put apples in, and the next day we had this Apodontia in the trap. So
is that where the Apodontia comes from, the apple part? Or no?
that is a really good tip, because I don't think I've read that anywhere ever. And, I've always just been like, how are people finding these things? Like, I've been in places with lots of burrows. I've got my thermal. I don't really trap much, but I was like, what am I not doing right? And so I'm gonna, all right, I'll give that a try.
Brett, that was a real pleasure to talk to you. Fascinating conversation. When you got in touch and modestly suggested we might be interested to talk to you, must admit, I'd never thought about talking to someone on the policy side and the legal side before, but you're absolutely right. It's a fascinating and super important part of the whole conservation equation. As you say, there's a lot, scientists documenting extinctions is, if left to their own devices, that might be what happens. So we need the people on the other side to turn that knowledge and that evidence actually into action on the ground and to save things. So really interesting to hear how that works. Really happy to know that the mammal watching community might be able to play a part by giving legal standing to some of these issues. I think there's going to be someone for every species on this site. And we'll get people to sign up. And really great to hear about some of those non-work experiences of yours from having a Wolverine almost run into you to swim with blue whales. And I hope the apples for the Apodontias work and you get a new family there. So I hope that at least made it worthwhile coming on this podcast. Thank you again. It was great meeting you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Brett. It's been absolutely fascinating. And good luck with those mountain beavers.
Yeah, great chat with you both of you.
You've been listening to Mammal Watching with Charles Foley and John Hall. You can find other episodes at mammalwatching.com/podcast.